Hello, everybody. I'm Natalie Brunell. Thank you so much for checking out my show, where I get to hear from the leading voices in Bitcoin, financial markets, political structures, philosophy, and more. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show. And if you're watching this on YouTube, like this video so more people see it and hit that notifications button so you don't miss out on any new content. This podcast does not provide financial advice. It is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So make sure you always do your own research before making any financial decisions and be aware of your risk tolerance. I'm able to produce this show thanks to my sponsors, and I'm very picky about who I choose to partner with. So I hope you'll take the time to listen to the ad reads throughout the show. All right, now to my main partner, Swan Bitcoin. Swan is where I do all of my Bitcoin purchases. In fact, I dollar cost average every single day, not every week, not bi-monthly, every single day. I love Swan Bitcoin because it is a true Bitcoin only company. Swan has a ton of free educational resources on their website, and they now have a mobile app, which I've been using to smash by some Bitcoin. And Swan Studios produces my new show, Hard Money, which covers the biggest news in Bitcoin and the global economy. It's like an orange-pilled version of CNBC, so make sure to check that out on YouTube for all the biggest headlines, because we are not afraid to question the mainstream narrative. All right, it's time for the show. All right, today I am joined once again by Aleksandar Svetski. If you guys remember, I had him on with Mark Moss a couple of months ago. I believe it was the summer, and he had just written the book UnCommunist Manifesto. So Aleks, good to see you.
Natalie, good to see you. It's been, has been almost a year since then, right?
I feel like it's been, at least 6 to 7 months. Yeah, it's crazy how time has flown in the bear market.
2022, man. What a year, huh?
I know. Well, I know you're working on a couple of exciting things. So I'm going to ask you all about the Bitcoin times, but I want to start with your backstory, because that's something I never got in the last episode. So parents born in Macedonia, and then you were born in Australia. So what can you tell us about, your upbringing?
Well, in Australia, we've got this term called wogs, which is kind of like, it was a derogatory term, which basically meant like fobs, fresh off the boat. And in the 60s and 70s, there was a massive exodus of basically Italians, Greeks, Macedonians, Serbians, and all that sort of stuff. But primarily Italians, Greeks, and Macedonians. They were like sort of the three big ethnicities that left their country and went to Australia, America, and Canada primarily. And I mean, to this day, I believe the second largest cohort of Macedonians is in Australia, and so is the second largest Greek population is in Australia as well, in the world.
Wow.
So yeah, so fun fact. So my dad was on one of those boats, with his family in the 60s. They went there and they basically started from scratch building stuff. And they sort of got termed wogs, right? Like that was the name. And it was sort of what the Anglo-Saxons and the Aussies at the time, like they were teasing them. Like it was.
What does it stand for?
I don't know what the fuck it stands for. Just, it's basically like a variation on fob.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, they grew up like, copying a lot of shit from, the Aussies, but, they did their thing. They basically built Melbourne. Melbourne is like the coolest city in Australia. Like it's the one with all the culture and all the food and all the cool shit.
Wow.
And there's like, you feel the difference if you go to Melbourne versus Brisbane. The gap has closed a lot, because I think, that sort of the Melbourne-ish culture is sort of spread all throughout Australia. But particularly like 10, 15, 20 years ago, like it was night and day. Like Melbourne was like mini Europe, and then Brisbane was like fucking kangaroo state. There was nothing there. It was fucking boring as hell.
Wow.
So anyway, that sort of generation grew up, and they basically all came with nothing. And they brought their language, their culture, their way of thinking, their hard work and all that sort of shit with them. And, they brought some culture to Australia. They brought business and stuff. And then, I am part of the generation that grew up to parents who were called wogs, basically. And what was interesting about my generation was we grew up and took that derogatory term and kind of took it as a badge of honor. So kind of like, the toxic maximalist thing, so Bitcoiners get called maximalists, so we take it as a badge of honor. You get called toxic and we become more toxic. So like it was almost that sort of mentality of like, all right, well, you're going to call me wog, then fuck you. And there was a whole like cultural movement around it. In fact, there's a hilarious movie called The Wog Boy, which is an Australian comedy with a guy called Nick Giannopoulos, and it's fucking hilarious. Now, I don't know if an American will like entirely get all of the jokes in it. Like, if I mean, you guys had your equivalent with My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but
Okay.
Wog Boy is like 100 times funnier. But you get all that sort of funny, weird, quirky shit that you sort of see in that generation. So, anyway, to tie this back to my upbringing, so I sort of got brought up in in Australia in kind of like a new suburb. My dad, the typical wog, found this little suburb where there was nothing there, and he found like the center of it, bought some land there, and built the fucking house with his own hands. And we were like the first house in the settlement, and then sort of everything built around us. And we went to school, and the school was right across the road to us, and we were always late, of course. The bell would be ringing and fucking sprinting across the road and shit. But yeah, it was an interesting upbringing. But like, I could go on a million tangents here. But my parents sort of divorced when I was how old was I? Like 10. It was a really messy divorce, so we spent like 3 or 4 years in fucking family courts, which is one of the downsides of like wogs, right? Like there was sort of this generation like with 1 foot in the old world and 1 foot in sort of the new world, and like they didn't know how to deal with like Western values and older wog values. It was a fucking mess. And anyway, yeah, thereafter, like I moved in, took care of my grandma when I was like 16, for a number of years, living out in the fucking country, out in Whoop Whoop somewhere. And then, yeah, went to university when I was 18 and dropped out to go and pursue the stock market when I was 19, 20, and kind of never looked back since. So
okay, I want to hear a little bit more about that, but do you know the immigration story? Like, why did your family want to go to Australia? Why did they choose Australia instead of, do you know any of that?
Fuck if I know. I don't know. Like it was weird. Like, because Australia is about as far as you can pick from sort of Southern Europe. It's like it's bumfuck nowhere basically. Like I don't know what got into them, why they picked Australia, but yeah, that's where they went. So no idea why.
You have to send me 100 sats every time you say the F word.
Oh, sorry. Okay, deal.
Keep this family friendly, Aleks.
1,000 already. Okay,
I have to already hit the explicit button. No, just kidding. Okay, so you dropped out. You dropped out of school and you went to pursue a career on the stock market. What do you mean?
Oh, not so much a career. I was just this dumb kid who I was very good at engineering academically. So I got given a bunch of scholarship money, but I figured that everyone around me was an idiot. So I decided to challenge myself by simultaneously taking my scholarship money and investing it in derivatives. So I taught myself how to do options and warrants and stuff like that.
Wow.
And this was when we still had like, the big ass like computer screens, like when they first came out at uni. And there was like 100 hours of internet per month, and you had to go in and sign in and get your internet per month. And like it was the first online broking things that came out, kind of 2006, 2007. So I was like an early customer of that. And yeah, I kind of taught myself. So it was like, I want to make a bunch of money out of my scholarship money, and I want to still beat everyone in class with no textbooks. That was my MO. And I did both initially, and then everything went downhill from there.
You are very much someone who I see as being kind of like a rebel, if you will, like beat to the sound of your own drum, or whatever that saying is.
Yes.
Where do you think that kind of personality trait comes from?
I don't know, Nat. I've asked myself this a lot of times. I think the older I get, the more maybe humble I become. I hope, at least. When I was young, I was like a raging lunatic. I would, like, I remember I had a motorbike accident once, and it was a severe motorbike accident. I tore half my ass cheek off. And is that allowed? Is that family friendly? Butt cheek? Okay. And yeah, I like within a week I got another motorbike and I was riding again. Like, so I would do all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. So I'm not entirely sure where that comes from. I don't know if I think it's a mixture of nature and nurture. I think some people have a natural predisposition toward being rebellious, and then there must have been some things along the line. Like, I've thought through this because I also, in my life, I've broken rules that were just didn't need to be broken, like, unnecessary things. Like, and, I'd go and play with fire just because. I remember once when I was, man, I would have been like 7 or 8 years old. And this is like the peak stupid of like this kind of behavior was my parents were out working because, they would both work during the day. So I was washing the dishes and we had a blender. We had this old blender, which, in the olden days, like the blender would all come apart and, you'd have the blade was separate. So I reconstructed the base of the blender and then I wanted to see if I could turn the blender on and hold my finger like on the middle of the blade without chopping my finger off. And of course, my
No.
finger slipped into the blade and I almost chopped my finger off.
Oh
And then,
man.
it
You
was
were one of
the, it
those
was the
kids, huh? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
really, yeah, like I electrocuted myself. I did all that sort of stuff. And like each time though, like I tried to hide the whole like nearly chopping my finger off. And when my dad came home, he beat the absolute crap out of me for being stupid. So like I ended up with like a chopped up finger and bruises from like my dad. So it was yeah, that was my upbringing.
Well, it's interesting because obviously we grew up on different continents, but coming from immigrant parents,
Mm-hmm.
I was always, instilled with this sense of I have to kind of I was always afraid of authority. I would say I felt like I wanted to please them, make them proud, and school was a big way to do that, right? Like I have to study, I have to get really good grades, and then I have to uplift my situation so that it's different from the one that they kind of raised me in. And so did you ever, I mean, did you have that sense of I want to make something of myself so that I can help provide for my family, my future family, or my current family? Did you, because dropping out of school, I mean, if I did that, I would have broken my parents' heart.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There was, but it was the way it manifested in my life was a little bit different. So my dad was very hard on us. Like he had this saying. It was like, you can't be another number. You have to make something of yourself. So that was his whole thing, and he drilled that into us big time. And for him, success meant one of three things: becoming a football player, so a soccer player, becoming a famous musician, or becoming an actor. Like that was his three things. Anything
Oh,
other than that,
wow.
you were a failure and you were a nobody.
A
Like that was his
doctor,
thing.
a lawyer?
That's a nobody, based on his
Whoa.
definition. So he pushed us in those directions. And it's funny, like when I was young, I was a great guitarist. I was a super good football player. I did all sorts of like, as a kid, I was like doing modeling and I was an extra in a bunch of movies and all this sort of stuff. But the thing is, like, I ended up resenting that because it was him projecting his
Mm,
vision of what success meant onto me.
mhm.
So as soon as I through the divorce period and all that sort of stuff, a lot of that stuff kind of fell by the wayside. And then, as I said, like I ended up moving in to take care of my grandmother, like in another city somewhere. So I dropped all of that stuff. I stopped playing guitar, stopped playing football, stopped caring about all that other stuff. And what I actually doubled down on was school of all things. And like I absolutely aced school, but I broke every rule at the same time. I remember I think I got voted most likely to go to jail for like the prom or whatever in that school.
The
But
superlatives, yeah.
yeah, I know, right? But the thing was, I also came first in the entire grade in the entire school for my examination. So it was like the
Wow.
teachers didn't know what to do with me. So like they didn't
Right.
know whether to like expel me or like keep me. I was like this weird blend of things. So yeah.
Got it. Okay. So did you do well when you were, becoming a day trader on these derivatives? Did you make good
Yeah, I
money
thought
or
like the first 6 months, I thought I was a genius. Like I turned 5 grand to like 60. I was like, yeah, man, I bought my motorbike. I moved into this cool like apartment. I thought, I had this plan. I was like, okay, by the time I'm 20, I'm gonna be a millionaire. And then yeah, Bear Stearns or someone like that failed. And then like the whole world crumbled on top of me.
wow.
And
So what
and
did you
yeah, by the time
do?
I ended up borrowing a bunch of money, going into margin, and by the time I was 20, I was $250,000 in debt.
Wow. We're going to take a quick break from the show to hear these messages from my sponsors. First up, iTrustCapital. Do you save in Bitcoin for your retirement in your IRA? iTrustCapital allows you to invest in Bitcoin and other digital assets with the tax benefits of an IRA. And unlike the stock market, you can buy and sell 24 hours a day. Instead of paying taxes on Bitcoin gains every year, you can defer taxes using an iTrust crypto IRA, or with an iTrustCapital Roth IRA, you can withdraw tax-free at retirement. iTrust recently hit a milestone of $6 billion in total transactions across the platform, and that's $6 billion in tax-advantaged accounts that those 87,000 new IRS agents can't do anything about. The iTrustCapital platform is easy to use and only takes a few minutes to set up. And if you want to start investing with a $100 bonus, head to iTrust.capital/Natalie Brunell. Next up, let's talk about Bitcoin 2023. That is the biggest Bitcoin conference in the world. And take a look at the video from last year in Miami. It was an incredible event that was jam-packed with the best speaking sessions, workshops, and networking events that I've been to in the space. I had the chance to live anchor the Bitcoin Magazine news desk and serve as MC. And it was such a full circle moment for me to be at that conference because the first one I attended was Bitcoin 2021 in Miami. And that's where I actually launched the Coin Stories podcast. I went on a media pass because I used to be a reporter, and I actually went backstage and started asking the speakers like Michael Saylor and Preston Pysh if they would come on my show. And they did. And a year later, I'm back at the conference as someone who actually has a career now in Bitcoin. So you never know what can happen at these events. I highly recommend going so you can meet other people that share the same values and passion for Bitcoin. And if you want your ticket at a 10% discount, head to b.tc/conference and use the code HODL, HODL. I'll see you there.
By the time I was 20, I was $250,000 in debt.
Wow.
So yeah, I had the car in reverse instead of in first gear. I just went backwards.
So how did you get out of it? Did you have to start, working some job that you really didn't expect?
Yeah, pretty much. So the first, like, I had had one job when I was 16. I was a pizza delivery boy, and I crashed the car twice because I was trying to like do cool things in the car, and I got fired after 2 weeks. So that was like the extent of my working career. And so what am I, like 20 years old, thinking, what the hell am I going to do? So the only thing I get was going door to door, doing sales, and I was the thing, like, so it was commission only, so you can knock all day and get paid nothing. And I was always an introvert, so this is something that some people don't know about me and they don't expect it, but like I much prefer like having my own time and being alone, not being around people. Like I get drained with that. And sales is generally an extrovert's job. So I remember I did two things that were pretty formative. So one was I had a couple grand left in my account from my trading account. So I went and actually did a Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within weekend. And that kind of like, it shook me up in a very positive way. At first I was like, fuck is wrong with these Americans, like jumping up and down and all this sort of shit. But then, sorry, I swore again.
Did you walk on the fire, the coal?
Yeah, I did the firewalk. I did, that whole stuff. And it was, I mean, the firewalk was interesting and everything, but it was like Tony's call to something greater of each person. So he's a master at like calling upon people to be the best version of themselves, for lack of a better term. And I don't think that's the motivational thing. I think it's very different. It's an inspirational thing. And inspiration is a pull thing. Motivation is a push thing. So that plus going and having to basically, I had to pay one bank $900 a week, the other bank $600 a week before I could even eat. So I moved into this guy's apartment and I lived in his lounge room. I got like a $50 mattress, put on the lounge room, and I would get up in the morning. I would go to the gym. I'll train my ass off for like 2 hours. Then I would get to the office. I would basically train incoming salespeople because I got very good at learning sales because I studied some NLP, some neuro-linguistic programming, and just understood how to communicate very well.
Mhm.
And yeah, then all day I would go out and knock on doors, and within like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I became one of the best salespeople in the country for pay television. And the funny thing was, I didn't even have a television. I didn't know what was on pay TV. I just got very good at communicating. And
Wow.
yeah, that's kind of how I started digging my way out. And then off the back of that, I realized that maybe instead of selling for someone else, I should have my own sales company. So I left, set up my own one. A bunch of people came, followed me, built that. And then that's how I mostly got out of debt until my business partner at the time, we had a dispute. He took half the money from the bank account and disappeared, and then kind of left me with all the debts and all that sort of stuff. So that kind of flattened me a little bit, but I started again, and then I built a company. I took kind of that sales skill and then kind of like a natural sort of hustler, get things done. I figured out how to build a solar company. So we did solar installations on houses and did all that crap. And yeah, that's where I made my first million, so-called, when I was 23. And that's kind of how my life took on a very entrepreneurial flavor from there on.
That is really fascinating, Aleks. I didn't know any of this. It's really interesting. I guess I'm not totally surprised knowing your personality and having heard you speak, but that's super interesting. Okay, well, so great financial crisis that you mentioned was obviously when Bitcoin was invented. At what point did you hear about it for the first time?
So I didn't. I would have heard about Bitcoin somewhere around, if I'm throwing a dart in the dark here, like maybe 2012. And it would have been because during that time when I was doing door-to-door sales, I was like watching Mike Maloney, Max Kaiser,
You were?
all the old early gold bugs, right? But at that time, like what I was interested in was gold and silver, and that was also part of how I got myself out of a rut. Was I went long with options and physical and everything, gold and silver in 2010. I made a bucket load of money on the way up. So I became a real hard money advocate. And that was kind of like my first introduction to sort of Austrian econ and everything. But I didn't take it further because, as I said, I kind of like the sales industry took me into entrepreneurial, and I kind of left a lot of that to the side. But yeah, I think I'm pretty sure I saw Max jumping up and down on a couch or something talking about Bitcoin, and I was like, "What's this idiot talking about now?" Like, so I kind of like wrote it off at the time, and I never Bitcoin didn't come across my radar again until like 2016.
Oh, wow.
Which is when it was about 4 years later, I guess 4 or 5 years later, when I resaw it. I was like, "Is that thing still around?" And then the bug kind of caught me properly that time.
So what were you doing at that point, and how did you, go down the rabbit hole? What resources did you use, and how did you come to your ultimate conviction that this is, the best engineered money?
Yeah, there was. So I had just finished up with it was a failed startup. Basically, we had come up with an idea. The idea was brilliant. It was super novel. So all the NLP that I'd done, and like, I had a small stint in trying to do like therapy and psychology, which I was very good at. Like I was helping people that were like ready to commit suicide and depression, all this sort of crap. And anyway, like I did a lot of practice with understanding personality types and modalities and submodalities of the mind and all of this. So me and a friend, we got together, and I was running a string of hospitality venues. So I had these like health food cafes, and he was running sales companies. And I mean, we weren't friends initially. It was just some dude who was actually coming buying smoothies at my freaking shop, and we just had instant rapport, and we started talking about all this stuff, and we both aligned on a single point, which was it's really hard to hire good people, and all of the methods of hiring good people suck. Like doing a job ad sucks. So we came up with this kind of Tinder for jobs, basically, which was on the talent side, to help them build a profile out, which looked at basically we created this 5-step personality profiling tool, then blended some skills and experience in, and they build a profile, and that's it. They don't job search, they don't do any of that. They just build a profile, and then the company would build a open position in which they define essentially the character archetype and the person they want, and then our algorithm would match them.
Yeah,
exactly. And
that's cool.
if you both swipe right, you can communicate. If one swipe left,
that's a great idea. Is that still around? Did you sell that?
No. Unfortunately, it was a failed startup because I think a couple things. One was I was young, and it was my first tech startup really, so I didn't kind of know what I was doing. Had a bunch of young kids building cool stuff, and like the design was gorgeous, the app was cool, but we didn't really understand like go to market or anything like that. Number two, the venture capital space in Australia really sucked. Like it took us a year to raise like $500,000 Australian, which is like 300,000 US. Like it was nothing. And this is actually, this is where I went to Shark Tank for. Like I ended up on Shark Tank in Australia for this, which was the dumbest thing I've ever done.
I was literally just about to say, why didn't you go on Shark Tank? You did? You went on Australian Shark Tank.
It was a poop show.
So, oh my God. Do people have this clip online or no?
Yeah. I always get trolled about it. But basically the online clip is like 15 minutes of the 1 hour that I was in there. And what I learned about that was, I naively went thinking that, we're going to get publicity and, we'll raise some money. Man, I got made a mockery out of. It was such a joke. Like the whole thing was sort of set up like, so what, where they record you like going in and coming out, they actually pre-scripted that for me of like everything that I was supposed to say. So like, I'm a shark going into the Shark Tank or whatever the kind of crap I ended up saying. So it was the biggest like setup, and I just made an absolute fool of myself. But so anyway, the startup ended up failing because two-sided marketplaces are very, very, very difficult to build. So as much as the idea is cool, like if you don't have a bunch of candidates on there, the employers weren't really incentivized to come on. And if there's not a lot of jobs on their employers, candidates wouldn't come. So like to really get something like that off the ground, you need a good 10, 20 million. Like if you look at how Uber, Airbnb and all these sort of guys like grew, like they had large investment from the beginning. So that was probably the biggest reason. It was like a mixture of inexperience and just way undercapitalized. So, that finished up, but it was in the aftermath of that I was sitting around with his friend, and he was he was my brother's friend actually. And he was like a kind of degenerate, like his parents were super, super rich from buying up like land and cafes in the center of Sydney back in like the 60s or 70s. And, he was basically like snorting his, inheritance. And he mentioned this thing called Bitcoin. And I was like, huh? Is that thing still around? And, we got into this whole conversation. It's like, yeah, bro, my cousin, he took, $1,000 and he made it into 200,000. It's like, I was like, what's going on here? And that's kind of like what I started looking at it. And, I climbed Mount Stupid. I thought I discovered like the blockchain and, all this other crap. And, I did a bunch of shit coining. I hope I can say that. And
you wrote a great article about it. Why Bitcoin, not other coins?
Yes, the other coin. Yeah. So like I did that, and the thing is, I came full circle to Bitcoin very, very, very quickly because I just realized that hold on, there's something here which is like fundamentally important, and I guess I didn't see the gravity, or I didn't see the size of it at the time, but something I guess instinctively kept drawing me in, and I was like, there's something big here, and then I started Amber in 2018, and here we are now, like 5 years later. It feels like it feels like a whole different like life.
I know. It's like we all have new identities via Bitcoin. And I personally think that they're much more fulfilling. But okay, so I want to go into Austrian economics a little bit because I didn't know that there were different, schools of thought within economics. I don't even know if I liked the class that I took when I was, in high school on economics. I can't even remember really what I learned about. And now I'm so passionate about it. I could literally watch hours and hours and hours of economics videos.
Such a
And
nerd.
yeah, well, and Bitcoin obviously teaches you about Keynesian versus Austrian and all of that. So your newest edition of the Bitcoin Times is going to be the Austrian, right? You're going to feature like Saifedean and all of that. So I want to talk to you about Austrian economics, but first, tell us about the Bitcoin Times.
Okay, so the Bitcoin Times started in 2018, I think, where it's a funny story as well. I got invited, so it was around the time I started Amber, and I got invited well, I wasn't invited. I went to this conference to raise capital, and this was sort of 2017, 2018 when the ICO craze was occurring. Like everyone was like making a token for anything, like tokens for toasters, tokens for dentists, tokens for dogs, tokens for like you name it. It was an ICO craze. And I went to this conference to raise some money, and I was the only basically Bitcoin related company that didn't have a token. And I'm like looking around me, I'm like, what's going on with this world? So the talk that I ended up giving was how ICOs are effectively a scam, and that you're out of your mind if you're going to buy into someone's token, because as an investor you have no equity, no rights, no nothing. You've just given someone money for like digital toilet paper money printed out of like literally just conjured up out of thin air. I did that, and the end of my talk was basically like, Amber's here and you're actually getting equity. Surprise, surprise, as we've done since the beginning of time. So anyway, like,
And Amber, by the way, for people that don't know, that's an Australian exchange, right? Where you can buy and hold Bitcoin. You can DCA. You can, what's the Schiff feature? You can buy every
buy
time
the
Schiff,
Schiff.
buy the Schiff every
Yeah,
time Peter
yeah.
Schiff tweets about Bitcoin.
Basically, it's hilarious. So yeah, the long and short of it was I bifurcated the whole audience, right? So like half the audience was like people raising money through tokens and they were like ready to kill me. And then the other half of the audience were people that were investors and they were like coming up and thanking me, saying, thank God you're the first person who got up today and said something that made sense. They're like, I've been confused this whole time, thinking that I'm missing out on something, but none of this makes sense. And I was like, no worries. And then the organizer comes up to me like right as I was walking out of the door, is like, do you know how much money you just cost me? You'll never be invited to this event ever again. And I was like, okay. So anyway, like a year later, he messages me and he's like, look, we know, I know I told you never to come to our event again, but you know what? You were right. And because this is after obviously ICOs blown up and everything like that. And he said, look, can we get you to come again? People have been emailing us saying that your talk from last year was the best and it saved everyone money and all this sort of stuff. Like, can you come and talk? And he said, like, don't worry, this time there's no ICOs. And I said, okay, no worries. And he's like, I said, what's the theme this time? He's like, blockchain. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, bro. So I was like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah. So anyway, I went and my talk was entitled Blockchain is Dead, the Future is on Lightning. And I still remember his face, like in the back of the room. He just like, he went white. He was like, oh God, this asshole done it again. And I just like, I gave this talk about like how blockchain is a scam. It's a buzzword thrown around by corporates who don't understand Bitcoin and have no incentive to understand Bitcoin, and therefore want to peddle a new buzzword to sell people overpriced databases, basically. And I talked about Bitcoin in all sorts of ways. Breaking down the idea of blockchain, why it's security is actually a function of the cost that exists in the Bitcoin network through mining, et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, I had too much to say, so what I did was I created a PDF which we handed out on the day, and we just named it the Bitcoin Times. We had to like do something with it, and everyone loved it. So I decided to then, when we got back to the office, we actually turned it into a nice, well-designed PDF. And a year later, I rounded up a couple people, and we decided to do Bitcoin Times Edition 2. And this was like, with Gigi and like, who else was there? Nick Carter and like a bunch of cool people, at the time. And it was actually, it was sort of like around the time when Gigi, Breedlove, and I, like, we were all sort of still unknown. I remember like Gigi had like 3,000 followers and I had like 1,500 and Breedlove had like 1,600. Like we were nobodies. And we wrote the second edition, and that really like got some attention. And edition 3 was the one that got loads of attention with like Parker and Jeff Booth and Jimmy Song and stuff like that. yeah, and here we are, like sort of in the fifth year, and like I've decided to make it a little bit like I've decided to professionalize it in the sense that now it's like a physical collectible that people can buy once a year, and it's only available in Sats. And yeah, basically it's like there's the collectible. There'll only be 2,100 of each edition ever printed, and they're all uniquely numbered on the back, so people can buy them as a collector's item and just have something unique and with evergreen content. Like the writers are creme de la creme. Like there's no one better. So anyway, that's the premise of the content.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about Austrian economics. Why did you choose that to be sort of the next theme for the edition? And I really want to go back to first principles because I always find it fascinating, even when you have studied it for so long. For those out there that whether they're Bitcoiners or really new, what is Austrian economics?
So Austrian economics gets its name because there was like the primary thinkers of what you would actually call natural economics at the time were all sort of based out of Austria. There's a really good article actually in the Austrian edition by a guy called Rahim Tagizadagan. He's actually the student. He's a student of Hans Hermann Hoppe, and not just like a student like you and I are because we read Hans's books, but like he's actually his student. And Rahim is the last Austrian economist who's teaching in the traditional Austrian school of economics, like in Austria, which is it's a mouthful, but there's no more. Like they don't teach it anymore. And he's a very unique individual, and his piece was actually about basically a history of Austrian economics, where it sort of came from and how it spawned and why it was different to the top-down Keynesian-ish type of thinking that sort of came from England at the time. Primarily England and France was like this sort of, they had a different form of enlightenment, which was like a top-down enlightenment versus the Austrian school and even the Scottish sort of period of thinking. Like, and that's where you get people like Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations and things like that. The Scottish and the Austrians were far more grassroots type thinkers, and there was a bunch of different things, which is probably out of the scope of this discussion, that happened at the time culturally in those two places that enabled, or that I guess attracted, the kind of thinkers that looked at economics through the lens of a complex system and human action and praxeology, basically, which is the name that Mises gave the study of human action. And that's sort of where it spawned from. And that's how it sort of got its name, Austrian economics. It's not that it's, Austrian, it's just that they were the sort of the founding fathers of the school of thinking were Austrian, with Karl Menger and Mises in particular. So I guess that's sort of where it spawned. Like,
so talk about it. I mean, so when you think about these different schools of thought, Keynesian, if I really break it down to kind of the most simple for anyone to understand from any background, it's kind of one believes in more intervention, right? That you need sort of a central authority to come in to stimulate and to supposedly regulate the business cycle, whereas the other is more based on free markets and more of the capitalistic ideas. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the difference and why for so many Bitcoiners they align with Austrian economics? We're going to take another quick break to hear these messages from my sponsors. First up, Fold. Fold is the best Bitcoin rewards debit card and shopping app in the world. You can earn Bitcoin on everything you purchase, from Amazon to your groceries, with Fold's Bitcoin cashback debit card, and win free Satoshis every day, or even a whole Bitcoin by spinning the daily wheel and the purchase rewards wheels. I actually have an alarm set every single day so that I never miss out on spinning the daily wheel and earning free sats. And, I have to say that Fold is one of the best ways to get someone completely new into Bitcoin, because they can start earning it and learning about it and using it. So if you want to sign up and join the fun, head to foldapp.com/Natalie for 5,000 in free sats. All right, now I want to tell you about a company called CrowdHealth, which is a Bitcoin-enabled alternative to health insurance. Because let's be honest, the government and insurance companies have jacked up prices. They've made things super complex. And when you send your money in, it essentially goes into the health insurance black hole, and then you never see it again, even if you don't get sick and you don't need medical services because, you don't eat fiat foods. But then if you actually do get sick or you need care, you have to send them more money because something ends up not being covered. The great news is there's now an alternative brought to you by Bitcoiners, and it is called CrowdHealth. It is very different from insurance. Instead of sending your hard-earned money to an insurance company, you hold your money in an account that CrowdHealth helps you set up. And you can even convert the dollars in your account to Bitcoin. Now, the company is all about community. Remember, it's called CrowdHealth. So when someone in the community is in need, needs care, needs help, you can choose to actually use the money in your account to help them, or you can keep it in your account. And if you ever leave CrowdHealth, you can take the money that's left with you. If you want to learn more and sign up, you can head to joincrowdhealth.com/Natalie. Now back to the show and why, for so many Bitcoiners, they align with Austrian economics.
Yeah, so there's, in fact, in my piece that I wrote was Bitcoin makes Austrian economics possible. My whole argument was that, the last 100 years in particular, like 100 and something, 120 years, whatever it's been, have if we look at economics as a game that people play in society or in civilization, and the game, basically the scorecard is this token called money, and everyone's trying to orient themselves in such a way that they get the most points, right? Like society and life and economics is this game, and economics is kind of like the study of that game. Now, what's happened in the last 100 years is that we've had these major centralizing forces, like with the Industrial Revolution, with the rise of the nation state, with the ability to monopolize violence across like large numbers and things like that, have meant that we've also had sort of like the rise of industrial banking as well, and central banking, have meant that like the study of economics through the lens of centralized institutions has taken precedence. Like if you were someone who advocated for money printing instead of prudence, like staying on the gold standard, for example, you had an edge. You effectively beat out your competitors, and particularly if you had, and this was a key thing, is like if you had a strong industrial base and if you had a strong military. So if you had those two, you go and print. If you had no industrial base and poor military, like money printing would inevitably blow you up, right? Because you'd hyperinflate very quickly. But that was sort of the game. It's like the Keynesians kind of have won out over the last century because their process of like pulling the levers to extract money and to stimulate elements of the economy at the cost or to other elements of the economy, and in the process kind of enrich themselves, gave them the edge. Now the Austrians, they maintained the idea that, hey, let's not touch the levers. One must have restraint in the way. I shouldn't even say one must have restraint in the way they operate the economy, because Austrians just basically believe that there should be no one operating the economy. The best decisions are made at the edges. There's no way for a central authority to know what is best for an entrepreneur who wants to sell a product or service at the edge, because that entrepreneur has all the information. So they acknowledge the fact that there is a problem with the idea of central planning, and that problem is you can't gather all the data, you can't synthesize all the data, and you can't make a decision fast enough in order to ensure that it's right, and you can't correct fast enough. So basically all you do is you mess everything up downstream. So Austrian economics is like non-interventionist specifically. It puts at the center like private property. It understands things like capital being like time, energy, natural resources. I've got some notes here like meta capital being ideas, information, reputation. Work is just the use of capital. Capitalism is like enhancing value through more efficient and effective use of capital. The profits are good feedback, losses are negative feedback, so you know how to orient yourself and all this sort of stuff. So there's all these basically pillars of thought which all revolve around allow people to act towards their own ends and allow the scoring mechanism of the economy to tell those actors whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing and let them orient instead of babying everyone. And yeah, I guess that's a kind of the Svetski explanation of Austrian economics at this point.
No, I think that's great. And, I wanted to get your take because I feel like the country that my parents immigrated to, the U.S., the founding fathers, they wrote the Constitution with these ideas in mind of individual sovereignty, property rights at the core, and it was really that sense of capitalism. And I think capitalism, that word has been hijacked. I think, and the meaning has changed, and now the narrative around it has a very negative connotation that capitalism has led to this great wealth disparity. And I find it fascinating because as I studied this and learned more and more about Bitcoin and Austrian economics, I realized that it's actually not capitalism that we have. We have crony capitalism where the government picks winners and losers and they print money. And so the people closest to that monetary spigot obviously benefit the most. And the losers are not allowed to fail because there's a backstop and the Federal Reserve comes in and bails them out. And so we actually don't have capitalism at all, because if we did, risk would be rewarded, but also punished if people took on bad risk and made some bad decisions. So do you have any thoughts on that? Because one speech I remember, the very first time I ever heard you speak was at Bitcoin Day in Kansas City. And you talked about your remnant philosophy, which I find fascinating. Maybe we'll chat about in a sec. But you talked about how basically, we're like an airplane without an altimeter. We're kind of traveling and we no longer know up from down because, and I think I talked a little bit about this on one of my Fox hits, we have no price signals, we have no real interest rates. And so our economy at the foundation is just completely manipulated and destroyed. So any thoughts just around that from the frame of, Austrian economics as well?
Yeah, I remember that day in Kansas because I was I was unprepared and I just riffed off this stuff. And I don't know if it was your question or someone's question, but it was my response to a question around what's the important impact of Bitcoin in the world. And I think I said the reintroduction of consequence.
That's it. Yeah. Consequences.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the only way I'd augment that now since then is I would say the reintroduction of local consequences, because I think consequences have always existed. And this is sort of the Austrian argument. It's that if you do all of these, if you do all these shenanigans, as you mentioned, pick winners and losers and redistribute wealth and mess around with the economy and basically the points and scoring system in some way, basically you'll have consequences downstream that are unintended. So you'll either have demoralization of the people who do want to work and produce wealth, or you'll have the skewing of the incentives for people who do want to work and do want to do things. So it's always imagine playing a game of Monopoly where one player gets to basically just keep pulling money out of the till no matter what, and there's no way to beat that player. So what will happen is the other players on the board, instead of playing a good game, they'll actually try and be friends with that guy so that they can get a handout. And the whole game deranges. So it's no longer a game of Monopoly. It's a game of let's be best friends with the dude who is, got the money.
100%.
And then basically everything else downstream breaks down. And that's sort of what we got in the world today. Is you got either demoralization, and the biggest class of people that are being demoralized is essentially the middle class. But you also have the ambitious reorienting themselves, or the ambitious or the capable or the hustlers doing things that they potentially otherwise wouldn't be doing, or solving problems that potentially otherwise wouldn't be solved. And it starts to create this kind of Frankenstein of an economy. And that's always been the warning from the Austrians is don't meddle with it because you'll destroy it. And what it reminds me of is you know, those bodybuilders that like get the synthol and like pump up their muscles and stuff like that, like with fake muscles, like that's the economy that we have. Like we have this
100%.
fake ass economy, you know, like with fake muscles and fake everything. It's like it's not real and we don't know what's going on. And, you know, coming back to the concept of consequences, it's like, you know, the person making the mistake is not paying for the mistake. And if we use an analogy, like if I was to jump off a cliff and you died instead of me, like I'll just keep jumping off a cliff because someone else is dying for me. Like it doesn't work like that in real life. And if
Yeah,
economics,
it's a good point.
yeah, like if economics is not representative of real life, then you're actually not measuring real life. And then you have this sham of a game. So this is where sort of tying it back to Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is such an Austrian idea is that because Bitcoin's like real life, you can't rewind Bitcoin. Like if you send your Bitcoin to the wrong address, there's no support hotline to call and say, oh, look, please help me. Like, you know, the Bitcoin CEO is not going to come out and bail you out. Like none of that exists. So Bitcoin kind of similar to time in the real world is like unidirectional. It moves forward. There's nowhere to turn it back, which means that in an economic sense, when you make poor decisions, you as the decision maker will more likely be punished. And that will help you either reorient or move you down so that someone who's making better decisions can sort of move up. And that's more natural. That's more Austrian economics like, and that is healthier for society, for the game that we're playing.
Well, this is an interesting time, I think, to bring up something you wrote in your most recent article. I think that was published on Bitcoin Magazine. You said, you talked about personal responsibility, which I think we all need more personal responsibility in this world, especially today. And so many people are just looking for, you know, handouts, or they feel entitled to something, especially from the government. You said only responsibility can fix the world, and Bitcoin is responsibility go up technology. Talk to me about that.
Yay. Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to meme a new term into the Bitcoin lexicon. You know, we've had number go up technology, and I think that's great because it's true. Like the Bitcoin number go up technology exists in the node count, in the price, in the miner, in the hash rate, like in all this sort of stuff, and that's fantastic. But I think a bigger and more important thing, and I'm actually working on a book now, which I haven't announced, but maybe I'll just sprinkle it in here. I'm working on a book called The Bushido of Bitcoin, which is this idea of like the moral code for Bitcoiners. If Bitcoiners are going to inherit the earth, that's the assumption that we're all making, like in the sense that we're going to be the wealthy class. Do we want to be a bunch of morons like with Lambos, or do we want to actually embody some virtues? And the word Bushido comes from medieval Japan, kind of the samurai era, which is basically it's like a Japanese word for chivalry, like it's the warrior's way, and it's a list of virtues basically that we should seek to embody. And one of the virtues in there is responsibility. And I've come to think that responsibility is a virtue. Like I've come to think that freedom is not a virtue. Freedom is just a value or a state. And the way we get to freedom is by embodying the virtue of responsibility. Because if you abandon responsibility, you also abandon freedom, because you become beholden to something else. And I think that's an interesting thing about Bitcoin, which is why I'm trying to like sort of suggest this as something that people can use in their description of Bitcoin in the future. It's like it is responsibility go up technology, or another way to say it is it's responsible money. Because it's like it abides by the laws of the conservation of energy, right? Like there's no elasticity there, as Saylor would say. So I think by having responsible money, we get this kind of technology that makes responsibility essentially go up at the individual level. And it's that classic saying, if you want to be the change you want to see in the world. So if you start to become more responsible, I think the world starts to move towards that sort of that direction.
No, I love that. And the other little section that I saved of your article kind of fits in with this. You said a human with dignity helps himself and his family first. He extends that if it makes sense, but he does not impose that help. He doesn't force it on anybody. He does not meddle, and he leaves space for others to rise up of their own accord. And again, it's that idea of, you pick yourself up by the bootstraps. And that is also, I think, very capitalistic and in line with that Austrian sense of you define your own destiny, and hopefully the rules are fair, right? Because I think that a lot of people feel the frustration that they do in the current system because they know it's rigged, but they don't understand why, because they don't understand how banking and how money printing and all of that works. But they know the rules are sort of rigged against them. If the rules were fair, then it truly would be a meritocratic society where it would be equal opportunity maybe, but not equal outcome. And you rise by your own, skill sets and motivation and ambition. And I think that would actually be a more egalitarian world personally, as opposed to one where the wealth gap keeps growing and populism grows and people just go into these teams and they say, oh, it's red versus blue. And at the core of it is actually the money. The money is broken. If anything, it's more like Keynesian versus Austrian. If you're going to pick teams, I personally, I've become very disenchanted with politics for sure.
Definitely, yeah. The politics reminds me of that meme, the Simpsons one where you've got kind of like the people around the monkeys, and the monkeys are sort of fighting. And it's like that's basically what people have become. We've devolved into these like apes, yelling at each other about stupid political viewpoints. And while some of that does have merit, the thing is, if you don't fix the problem upstream, you have a problem. And I like that you picked out that piece about dignity, because I think my point in the article there, where I was saying is like, there's nothing worse than like that nosy Karen that just gets in your business and it's like, I'm here to help you and you must take my help. It's like, no, bro, just like leave me alone. Like that's the person that no one likes. And that's kind of what you see with this Davos crowd, basically, like the Websters. They're the Captain Fantastics that nobody ever wanted, that nobody ever liked, that nobody cares about, that nobody respects. Like they're the most pathetic people on the planet. And they're here to save the day when nobody asked them. Like I couldn't think of a less dignified existence than that. And that's why I sort of like, I think that word dignity is very important, because there's a real lack of dignity in the world, honestly. Like people
agree.
People accept things, they get trodden on because they've sort of lost that. And this is something I've been playing with recently, is like they've sort of lost that, warrior spirit, or that, that FU attitude. I think it's a function of like, just a creeping nihilism and apathy about the world, because you feel like you can't change that.
Right.
And like a dignified person is someone who gets his own stuff sorted out. And this ties back to the whole Jordan Peterson-esque things, like, clean your own room before you tell other people how to sort their thing out. And, like this is why I think, once again, Bitcoin is special, is that, it encourages you to sort your own self out first. And then when you're in a position, you can offer to help somebody.
Yes.
And it's their choice. It's up to them then to either accept that or not. You don't enforce your help. That's not help.
Right. No, for sure. And a lot of us, I think in the space, I've shared that meme because it makes me think of that, strong men create easy times create weak men create hard times. And I think we're in that zone right now, for sure. So, okay, well, to start to wrap up, I really wanted to touch on something, because you do write about and envision this world where we are all on the Bitcoin standard. But I'm kind of curious, because lately what I think about is it a zero-sum game? Like as Bitcoin adoption grows and people pile in and they use it as a savings technology, but also are empowered through the Lightning Network to use it as a medium of exchange, is it just an asset class like gold, or does it become the reserve currency around what do you see? Is it everything or nothing? Is it Bitcoin is zero, or Bitcoin, can it fall in the middle? Can it just be maybe like a 10, $20 trillion market cap, but then we still have all these other currencies? How do you envision this actually playing out?
That's a question of time. So what time scale are we talking about? Are we talking about our lifetime? Or are you talking about like...
Sure. How about in our lifetime?
Yeah, probably in our lifetime, it'll be, I think, a big asset class and something that's used as a payment mechanism in some smaller countries, probably like, the Salvadors of the world, and maybe some new kind of private city states that emerge, in maybe other broken countries. So probably in those spaces, it'll be like a backbone for, the entire economy, for payments, for all that sort of stuff. I think in our children's lifetime or our children's children, it'll be the only thing left. So I think more than likely, and I hope I'm wrong, I hope it's sooner, but I don't know, cultural things take a long time to shift, and, they're sort of generational in nature. But I feel like, yeah, like the US dollar, I doubt that it's going away anytime soon. I think people are a bit naive thinking that. There is still an industrial base, there's still a military might. As much as people have lost all hope in, the political system, the political system is still extraordinarily powerful in the US and, in the West in general. So, there's lots of money there. There's lots of misplaced trust still there. So yeah, my guess is that that's going to probably endure for a while, and yeah, we'll see Bitcoin probably, and maybe honestly, like in different jurisdictions, just treated a little bit differently. Maybe in the US, where the US dollar is still the main medium of exchange, it may be treated more like an asset there. But in Africa, where there is no useful medium exchange and everything's fallen apart, maybe there, like, it'll be used as more than that. So it'll be interesting to see.
That's interesting. All right. Well, we went a little over time, but where do you want to wrap this up? What else do you want to share?
That's it. Like, if people want to learn more about like Austrian econ, I'd really encourage them to just jump on bitcointimes.io and then pick up the latest copy of that. And then, I mean, for that matter, like, pick up all of them. I think the best article that I ever wrote was in edition 4 of the Bitcoin Times. It's called it's called Fire Bitcoin Teleportation. So it's kind of like this. It's like a real cosmic-y piece, like looking at Bitcoin from a real high level. So yeah, if people want to check that out, by all means, go there. And then,
what did Safe write his article about?
His one was it's called Making Time Preference Low Again.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a really good piece. So his one is about like how time preference actually changes the individual, and kind of we touched on that with the whole responsibility piece. Yeah. So there's a bunch of really good pieces in here. Like Goldstein came out of hibernation to write a piece. Pierre as well. Pierre Richard wrote a piece. So it's yeah, that's the best way for people to support if they want to.
Awesome. Well, I will link it. I will also link your book, UnCommunist Manifesto, which is great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to have this chat. I learned things about you that I never knew, and hopefully I'll see you in the new year. Congratulations, by the way. Newly married. Say hello to Paloma. We love her. So can't wait to see you in the new year. And thanks so much, Aleks.
Thank you, Nat. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for checking out this show. Again, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any new content. And I love to hear your feedback. Leave a comment or send me an email at natalie@talkingbitcoin.com. Let me know what you think, if you have guest suggestions, and I'll see you next time.